We are not such asses as to let them ride us as they please. That was the fiery attitude of a 19-year-old Alexander Hamilton in 1774, explaining the economic shutdown the colonies were implementing in response to the hated Coercive Acts and much more. Today, a shutdown is usually just a political game used to manipulate the people, but the original American shutdown was revolution. So on this episode, it's the story of the Continental Association. But first of all, before getting to that, welcome, and thank you for joining me here on the path to liberty. My name is Michael Bolden with the 10th Amendment Center, and this is the show for Friday, October 3rd, 2025. Let's get right to it. Go back to October 20th, 1774. The First Continental Congress just passed what today is known as the first of the founding four documents, the Continental Association. This was a coordinated economic shutdown in response to all kinds of attacks by the British Empire. They put it like this: to obtain redress of these grievances, which threatened destruction to the lives, liberty, and property of His Majesty's subjects in North America, we are of opinion that a non-importation, non-consumption, and non-exportation agreement faithfully adhered to will prove the most speedy, effectual, and peaceable measure. And therefore we do, for ourselves and the inhabitants of the several colonies whom we represent, firmly agree and associate under the sacred ties of virtue, honor, and love of our country. And they actually set up a four-pronged attack, a shutdown of the vaunted economic system that really gave the British a ton of power. And non-importation was the first prong. They said first that from and after the first day of December next, so December 1st, 1774, we will not import into British America from Great Britain or Ireland any goods, wares, or merchandise whatsoever, or from any other place, any such goods, wares, or merchandise as shall have been exported from Great Britain or Ireland. This is a pretty massive non-importation deal. And that was really just the headline, because they kept rolling from there. The full text was really just a hit list, including East India tea, indigo, plus molasses, coffee, and more from the Caribbean, wines from Madeira and the Western Islands. And Hamilton, this is the good one that we should have gotten much later, but we didn't end up with this version of Hamilton. He explained the choice was really boycott or war. He said, this being the case, we can have no resource but in a restriction of our trade or in a resistance by arms. We either are going to have to cut off our trade, use this as a tool, or we have to fight. And it's not that they were against fighting, but they were really trying to push off having to fight the British Empire as far as possible. He said, it is impossible to conceive any other alternative. Our Congress, therefore, have imposed what restraint they thought necessary. Those who condemn or clamor against it do nothing more nor less than advise us to be slaves. Now, a mass personal boycott through non-consumption was the next prong on this list. They said, from this day, we will not purchase or use any tea imported on account of the East India Company, or any on which a duty hath been or shall be paid, and from and after the first day of March next, so March of 1775, we will not purchase or use any East India tea whatever. And if you think about the context, the Coercive Acts were passed as punishment for the Boston Tea Party, and so they're punishing right back here. They said, nor will we, nor shall any person for or under us purchase or use any of those goods, wares, or merchandise we have agreed not to import in that first section as well. Now, the association wasn't just about boycotting, cutting off imports, cutting off purchases, etc. The third prong was really about replacing British goods and culture with American alternatives. Bring it back home. They said, we will, in our several stations, encourage frugality, economy, and industry, and promote agriculture, arts, and the manufactures of this country, especially that of wool. This Real America First shutdown was about much more than what they wouldn't import or buy. They also chose to cut off what they considered expensive, extravagant, even distracting parts of British culture and society, and instead establish a virtuous American approach that could survive the coming siege. They said, we will discountenance and discourage every species of extravagance and dissipation, especially all horse racing and all kinds of gaming, exhibitions of shows, plays, and other expensive diversions and entertainments. They were students of history. They certainly understood what empires do. They used bread and circuses to distract the people and reduce opposition. They weren't going to fall for this, and they made it very clear. They also took it so far to address how people dressed at funerals. They said none of us or any of our families will go into any farther mourning dress than a black crepe or riband on the arm or hat for gentlemen, and a black riband and necklace for ladies. And we will discontinue the giving of gloves and scarves at funerals. Now, last up in this four-pronged strategy was the big gun. They gave the British a deadline. Now, like any healthy boundary, you can't control the other party, but you can tell them, if you don't do A, we're going to do this. And they said if they didn't repeal a bunch of stuff, including the Coercive Acts, by September 10th, 1775, almost a full year, they were going to cut off all exports as well. They said if the said acts and parts of acts of the British Parliament herein after mentioned are not repealed, we will not directly or indirectly export any merchandise or commodity whatsoever to Great Britain, Ireland, or the West Indies, except rice, to Europe. Now, to understand some of the context of how they got there on October 20th, we got to go back a few weeks to the early days of the First Continental Congress. It's September 16th, 1774, and an express rider named Paul Revere came in from Boston, galloped down 2nd Street in Philadelphia. His task, well, to hand off the just passed Suffolk Resolves, primarily drafted by the great patriot and war hero Dr. Joseph Warren. It called for a bunch of stuff. This is not an exhaustive list. I've got an article that'll be included in the show notes if you want to learn more about it, but the Suffolk Resolves called for non-compliance with the Coercive Acts. It also urged for the people to defy British courts, urged sheriffs to stop enforcing British acts, and even called for tax resistance. Now, over at the Carpenter's Hall website, they point out that it also had a little precursor to what became the Continental Association. They said, as a parting shot, the resolves called for an embargo on British goods, in effect closing British ports in retaliation for closing the port of Boston. The Boston Port Act, one of the Coercive Acts, was a shutdown of the port. So they're saying, well, we're going to shut down the economy going back to you if you're trying to shut down us. And so it was a battle of various shutdowns. We'll get into that a little bit more in just a moment. But Paul Revere, he shows up in Philadelphia and says, here's what we just did in Boston. And so the very next day, they decide to debate these resolves. And Carpenter's Hall says, everyone listened attentively until the end. Then wild applause from most, but not all the delegates. Of course, Mr. Galloway wasn't super excited. He shouted over the din, for Congress to countenance such a statement is tantamount to a complete declaration of war. But they still passed it unanimously, at least according to the records. I'm pretty confident that a few people just signed on, even though they weren't fully in support. But this was the first official act of the First Continental Congress. Now, on September 26th, Richard Henry Lee of Virginia stood on the floor to take action in support of those resolves. And here from the Diary of John Adams, Mr. Lee made a motion for non-importation. As a model for what he was introducing there, he used the Virginia Association of 1769. This was a non-importation agreement in Virginia, introduced by George Washington It was drafted by George Mason, and it was adopted after the royal governor actually dissolved the House of Burgesses, but the members kept meeting anyways. They're like, okay, you're going to shut down our legislature? Well, we're going to go down the street, meet in a tavern, and we're going to do it anyways. Here's how Mike Meharry put it. By regrouping outside official channels, the Burgesses took a revolutionary step, organizing independent political action without royal approval. This laid the groundwork for self-government. Now, Virginia was not the only assembly that was getting a shutdown from the British. This was political manipulation. It was used as a punishment against the people. They repeatedly used government or local assembly shutdowns as a political weapon. They wanted to manipulate them into compliance. So if you did something wrong, we would not even let you have a meeting about anything. We're just going to control everything from afar. We're going to appoint who we want there, and you won't have any kind of representation on anything. Now, with the Coercive Acts, the Massachusetts Government Act may have taken it even further. That was really the kill shot on this. They outlawed all meetings without express approval from the Crown. They said no meeting, this was permanent, not like a temporary shutdown. No meeting shall be called by the selectmen or at the request of any number of freeholders of any township, district, or precinct without the leave of the governor or in his absence of the lieutenant governor in writing, expressing the special business of the said meeting first had and obtained. And as John Adams put it, just this alone was enough to justify a revolution. He said, a settled plan to deprive the people of all the benefits, blessings, and ends of the contract, to subvert the fundamentals of the Constitution, to deprive them of all share in making and executing laws, will justify a revolution. Now, I realize I am blasting through a lot of really important historical information pretty quickly here, but it's my hope that this episode, like every episode, serves as a bit of a highlight reel for you. And if you're the type of person who hears this stuff and says, man, I want to learn more about it, hopefully you do, because I'm really just scratching the surface here, you are in luck because the TAC has your back. After every single episode, we publish a blog post for that episode over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. Alan Mosley does an awesome job. We should all be grateful for Alan getting the blog posts organized very quickly, timely, consistently after every single episode. He gets that done and I get it published a couple hours later. But what you're looking for on each blog post is a show links section. You just got to scroll down past all the video platforms and then the overview and the audio platforms. You'll see show links. And generally, if my notes are done well, and I think I do a pretty decent job of these, he will have all the links that I'm mentioning in the order that I go through them in the show. Again, Alan will get that done. I'll get it published over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty a couple of hours after this live stream is done. Now, back to the First Continental Congress. It started in September of 1774. They debated this whole non-importation thing that Richard Henry Lee proposed for a number of weeks. But the debate wasn't really about whether or not they should do it at all. It was really more about logistics and timing, when it should start, how broad it should be. Should they just do non-importation? Should they do non-consumption? Should they also include export? So they all worked on this plan. But by October 14th, they pretty much had it nailed down. And they went on a bit of a side quest to pass what's known as the Declaration and Resolves of the First Continental Congress. You're going to want to read this one as well. I'm not going to cover it here in any detail because I just did an episode on it 2 days ago. That will be linked to in the show notes. But it also included a full list of grievances, plus all the acts that they wanted to see repealed. They listed out all the statutes and a Declaration of Rights. But at the very end, they had a plan of action. They said, well, for now, we're going to just stick to these peaceable measures, which included non-importation, non-consumption, and non-exportation association. Again, I covered that in some detail in an episode just 2 days ago. This wasn't a request. It was a refusal. Now, Alexander Hamilton, he made the case that this approach was really the only choice for anyone who wasn't a coward or a fool. He said, no person that is not lost to every generous feeling of humanity, or that is not stupidly blind to his own interest. Man, I wish we still had that Alexander Hamilton a few years later. Anyways, none of these people could bear to offer himself and posterity as victims at the shrine of despotism, in preference to enduring the short-lived inconveniences that may result from an abridgment or even an entire suspension of commerce. He acknowledged, this is going to be difficult. They weren't just in it to get a better deal. The better deal that they wanted was their right to local self-government and to stop having their liberties invaded by this far-off empire. And they're like, well, we're going to have to go through some trouble at some point. Let's do our best with this. But if you think about it, without enforcement, a non-importation, non-consumption, and non-exportation agreement is really just words on paper. So to give the association some teeth, Congress also included a pretty revolutionary enforcement mechanism here in Article 11, that a committee be chosen in every county, city, and town by those who are qualified to vote for representatives in the legislature, whose business it shall be attentively to observe the conduct of all persons touching this association. When a violation was confirmed, the committee's power was primarily in public shaming. They were instructed to cause the truth of the case to be published in the Gazette, to the end that all such foes to the rights of British America may be publicly known and universally condemned as the enemies of American liberty. And once a person was publicly named, the community's role was really to completely ostracize them. They said, and thenceforth, we respectively will break off all dealings with him or her. And to show the seriousness of their unity, Article 14 really addressed any non-compliant colony. And we do farther agree and resolve that we will have no trade, commerce, dealings, or intercourse whatsoever with any colony or province in North America, which shall not accede to, or which shall hereafter violate this association, but will hold them as unworthy of the rights of freemen, and as inimical to the liberties of their country. Now, this passed unanimously, but there were only 12 colonies present. Georgia was not there, so I wonder how much that was addressed to them to add some pressure. I don't know for sure. If you do, please let me know. But Georgia did join in the following year. And American History Central, I think they explain a big reason why the association was really, it's considered one of the, or actually the first of the founding four, the great documents of America. They said the Continental Association was important to United States history because it was the first time all 13 original colonies agreed to implement and enforce a trade boycott against Britain. Really, it was the start of the Union. And almost a century later, Abraham Lincoln, of all people, he made this same connection. The Union really started with the Continental Association. There's a bit of irony here. The U.S. was birthed in secession. And Lincoln was actually twisting this to claim that you couldn't have secession. He was arguing against secession, but that's a side story. Here's how he put it. This is in his first inaugural address. The Union is much older than the Constitution. It was formed, in fact, by the Articles of Association in 1774. Anyways, as T.H. Breen explained, once this was implemented, this new Union wasn't just a declaration on paper, it was a revolutionary takeover of government from the ground up on the local level. During the months following the announcement of the association in October 1774, the insurgency gathered momentum. Indeed, no sooner had the Continental Congress authorized this infrastructure for enforcing a commercial boycott than hundreds of committees throughout America seized control of local government, quickly becoming the face of revolution. And they had one primary mission, really, enforce the boycott. And the enforcement actually was incredibly effective. As historian Alan Taylor notes, the economic results were swift and pretty staggering. He writes, the committees proved remarkably effective, for the value of British imports plummeted from about 3 million in 1774 to 220,000. I don't know. I went to government-run school, so my math is terrible. Well, this is like 95%. This was during just the first 6 months of 1775. The British were pissed. The Reverend Samuel Seabury, writing as a farmer, he summed up the loyalist attitude pretty well. Basically, how dare you? He wrote, can we think to threaten and bully and frighten the supreme government of the nation into a compliance with our demands? Can we expect to force a submission to our peevish and petulant humors by exciting clamors and riots in England? We ought to know the temper and spirit, the power and strength of the nation better. A single campaign, should she exert her force, would ruin us effectually. And then back to 19-year-old Alexander Hamilton. He responded directly to this guy with what I think is one of the best quotes of the entire revolution. And it's an attitude that is seriously lacking today. He said, no, gentle sir, we neither desire nor endeavor to threaten, bully, or frighten any persons into a compliance with our demands. We have no peevish and petulant humors to be submitted to. All we aim at is to convince your high and mighty masters, the ministry, that we are not such asses as to let them ride us as they please. We are determined, he said, to show them that we know the value of freedom, nor shall their rapacity extort that inestimable jewel from us without a manly and virtuous struggle. Backbone and a complete intolerance for violations of the Constitution is almost completely missing in the so-called land of the free today. And that is a huge part of the reason why we believe it's so important to teach this forgotten history with these essential foundational principles. And nothing helps us do this work more than the financial faith and support of our members. If you got a couple of bucks of that quickly devaluing dirty government fiat, please consider throwing it our way over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. It's all spelled out. 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. Our membership program starts out at just $2 a month. We also have annual, 5-year, and lifetime options. Again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. I'd be very grateful for any consideration you can give to joining us today. But if you don't want to join and you still want to help us out, that is super awesome. Thank you. Or if you already are a member, first of all, thank you for that. I see a bunch out in the live chat every single time. I couldn't be more grateful for your support. But if you want to do an additional one-time contribution, I want to make sure you have the link to do that. It's 10thamendmentcenter.com/donate. We also have a bunch of free and easy peasy things you can do to help us spread the word, primarily triggering algorithms of the mainstream platforms you may watch or listen on. Watch time percentage on YouTube is a huge one. A 20-minute video at 20 minutes is 100%. 10 minutes is 50. Not so awesome. But I don't know, 40 minutes, you watch it 40 minutes, that's 200%. I don't know. Again, my math is terrible. You get the idea. The more you watch it, the more watch time percentage, the more they're going to show us to more people. Also, leaving comments, subscribe, notifications, sharing links, reviews on Apple Podcasts or any other podcast platform. All the stuff that you can do on these various platforms helps out a great deal. Thank you so much, whether it's financial, otherwise, or all the above. I can't thank you enough. I can't thank you enough for spending some of your time with me today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope it was interesting, entertaining, but more important than anything, I hope it made you think, and I hope you learned something. Again, I really appreciate you being here. Hope you have an awesome weekend, and I look forward to seeing you next week here on the Path to Liberty.